looking to have an elopement or an intimate wedding in New York City, and maybe you're just not exactly sure how to put all that together, whether you're local into the New York City area or you live in Australia, there are a lot of things that you need to consider when you go about planning this. And oftentimes, many people don't have a wedding planner, although you can, to coordinate these details for you. As a wedding photographer in the area for the last 6 years, photographing intimate weddings and elopements, I have seen many different ways to accomplish this, and I wanted to put together a video to highlight what I think are the top 5 things that you need to consider when you are planning your elopement or intimate wedding in New York City. So let's get started. So let me just consult my list here. The first thing that you definitely want to consider is the timing. When is your wedding going to happen? Aside from when you can take off from work or maybe friends or family, you definitely want to take into consideration the seasons. We have 4 seasons in the New York City area, which is wonderful. However, they are different. So you need to think about perhaps where you want to have your event, but also the time of year, because maybe spring isn't good if you have allergies. Fall may be a better option. Perhaps you've always dreamed of, getting married in New York City and taking pictures in front of the Rockefeller tree or another tree if you can't get close enough to that one. And these are all things that you want to take into account. The only times of year I would suggest avoiding would be as if you wanted to take pictures around the Bethesda Terrace area. Early June is not a good idea because they usually have a gala. There's also another one possibly in October, so you can check the Central Park Conservancy calendar to make sure there's nothing on the schedule, although they don't tend to post it super far in advance, usually just a couple months. But I have often warned people early June, later October, although it can be at a different location, but the June one is usually in the Bethesda Terrace, so I would avoid that then. Otherwise, if you have spring allergies, even if you're not sure what you might be allergic to, if you have other allergies, I would be careful. I moved here and didn't know I was allergic to maple trees and spent the first couple of years suffering. So that's usually May through June for typical spring allergies, but definitely look that up if that's a concern of yours. If you're just really opposed to certain types of weather, if your idea of fun is definitely not sweating all day or being out in the freezing cold, then certainly consider a more mild season like spring or fall. But winter and summer can also be pleasant, especially if you go earlier in the day or if you plan it out to where there's enough time to maybe take breaks, use hand warmers. The weather shouldn't be the number one thing you consider, but it's definitely a factor, especially if you are sensitive to that for whatever reason. So figure out the time of year that works best for you. That's the number one thing you're going to want to do before you contact anyone to help with your, wedding, whether it's a photographer or florist, whomever. You definitely want to have that date settled. I typically book weddings anywhere from a year to a few weeks sometimes in advance, so you definitely have time, or should have time, to carefully consider when the best time to come is. But for some people, the best time is next week or even tomorrow. So it all just depends on what your goals are and how much time you have to plan. So once you've figured that out, the next thing you definitely want to consider is who's invited. If you're having an intimate wedding, there's usually, I don't want to say there's usually a reason, but the attraction to having that sort of wedding could be that it might just be the two of you, that it's not going to involve any guests, and that's totally fine. I'm happy to be a witness. I know other people who, work in the industry and who are happy to witness as well. So it can be just the two of you. It can also be, for me, I kind of define intimate wedding up to about 20 people. Beyond that, it's hard to get around with a big group of people. It becomes a little more like a wedding, and instead of, a smaller scale event where it's focused more on the couple. So definitely consider that. Who's coming with you, if they're traveling, or if you're just inviting them locally, you definitely want to come up with an idea of that to help frame your day. Generally, I don't see more than around 25, maybe 30 people at City Hall, although I don't recommend it. It can be insane on a Friday anyway. And then if you bring 30 people with you, it's just a lot. It can be overwhelming. So unless that's exactly what you want, and you don't mind all the people coming with you, then I would plan on maybe having less people specifically for City Hall. You can have up to 20 in Central Park without a permit. I believe it's after 20, maybe 25. I gotta double check that. But you don't need a permit for many locations. If you have less than that, there are specific locations you'd want a permit, even if it's just 2 people. But generally speaking, that's, you know, you won't need a permit unless you have more than like 20 or 25 people. So yeah, so that's the first thing you want to do after you set the timing. The next thing would be to then specify who is going to come and who's not going to come. Perhaps you set up a video feed. I've seen couples do that on the day of the wedding for the ceremony. If someone's feeling left out, that's definitely a concern that a lot of couples have. And that's one way to accomplish that. If your, you know, family or friends can't travel, or you just don't want them to, then they can still be there for the day, drinking champagne and watching you toast, you know, from somewhere far away. So yeah, so decide who is coming and who's not. The next thing would be is, where's the ceremony going to be, or where's the reception going to be? Where are the events going to take place? Obviously, we're talking about New York City, and there are some really great options for essentially free ceremonies. You can, well, not quite free, but low cost. You can get married at the Manhattan or Brooklyn, or there are other marriage bureaus, but typically I mostly photograph at Manhattan or Brooklyn. I think it's only like $25. You have to get your license for any wedding 24 hours in advance. They're very particular about that. So once you have that license, you can get married. It's anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half, maybe longer in terms of wait, depending upon the day you go, the time of year, those sorts of things. But it's a great place for a low-cost wedding, and it is kind of fun. It has its own look to it, and it's definitely an experience. The other option is Central Park, or many other locations, or actually anywhere else in the city. You could hire an officiant, somebody who either does this professionally. You can even have a friend get ordained to officiate your wedding. That's definitely a great option if you don't want to pay for an officiant, although they're not terribly expensive. We're talking a few $100s. They do a nice job personalizing a ceremony for you and can help guide you with some other things, you know, related to putting on a wedding, which is wonderful to have, but not necessary if you have a friend who maybe is ordained. And anyways, so the ceremony can be then anywhere. It can be a hotel suite. I'm doing 2 tomorrow in hotel suites. It could be obviously in the park. It could be pretty much anywhere that you have permission, if it's private property. So if you plan to then have a reception, if there's space, you could have the ceremony occur right before the reception in a private dining room, or perhaps on that business's property. It just depends. I've done weddings all over the place. There are some hotels that have private, special, like small rooms that they rent out, like the Library Hotel. There's a church called All Souls Church on the Upper East Side, and they have a small chapel as well as a larger one for weddings, which is a wonderful option if you do want to be in a more religious setting. I've done weddings at consulates from various countries. So you know, the sky's almost the limit in terms of that, if you're willing to hire an officiant or someone who can legally do the wedding for you. And then after that, consider where you might want to celebrate. Are you going to have a lunch, a dinner? If it's just the 2 of you, that makes things a lot easier. But if you're having guests, well, then where are you going to go? Maybe you're going to have a picnic. I've had a couple did that. It was wonderful. They brought food to Central Park. They had a picnic right afterwards. There are many different ways that you can do that, but something to think about. Obviously for your budget, but also for planning purposes. You know, where is this going to be? There are many different choices for restaurants and private, you know, event spaces that can do, you know, a dinner for like 20, 30 people. And you can also just make a reservation. If there's a smaller number of you, you may not need a private room. So there are a lot of different options, but you definitely want to think about that part of the day. What else would you like it to include? Where will you be, you know, celebrating? I've had couples do a tea at the Russian Tea Room. I've had it at the Baccarat Hotel. I've had obviously the picnic, many people doing private, you know, dining, some of it really fine dining, and even just going to Shake Shack. I have literally seen everything. So it's really about what is important to you and who you're going to be celebrating with, and finding a way to bring it all together, you know, on that day. So the other thing would be then, oh yeah, where to take photos, which of course is very important, but it's something you want to think about when planning, you know, your time in New York. Where you're going to be doing your ceremony and having the dinner can certainly factor into that. It doesn't have to, But it's nice if things work out and it's really close by, like if you're gonna marry in Central Park, maybe you're staying at a hotel near Central Park or you live near there and then you've chosen a restaurant nearby or a short cab ride, especially if you have a lot of guests, keeping things in the general area are great, but that's not a reason to not say go to Brooklyn for some photos. We can do those before and then meet up in Central Park, or we can meet up at the Manhattan Marriage Bureau, go take some photos and then meet up with your guests later. There are so many wonderful locations. They don't have to always be super iconic. I do like to feature some New York elements. And if you're local, you may not want to include something crazy iconic or touristy. You may want it to be more subtle, like the cobblestones or the brownstones in the West Village, or a special location that is meaningful to you, maybe where the two of you met, or a place that you just simply like to go, your street, your dorm room. I've done photographed outside someone's dorm before. It's really what is important to you, and if that's something you have a personal connection to, or if you're coming from another country or another part of the US and it's maybe even your first time in New York, it's okay to go to the Brooklyn Bridge. It's okay to have those beautiful skyline photos as well, because they are beautiful and I still really enjoy seeing that every time. So, think about those locations and how we can work that into your day, and about how long you might want to take photos. Not everyone wants to spend all day taking pictures, or even an hour or two, but others do. And I've done 10-hour elopements where we literally conquered the city and went all over the place in a rented cab. And sometimes we just do a few family group photos at City Hall right after. It's really up to you what you want to do. So you want to think about that when it comes to perhaps how much time you're going to have. My collections start off with 2 hours and go on up after that. So that's one place to start to think about, well, how much time do I want to take? That's Prince Harry. How much time do I want to spend on the photos, and where might we go? I'm a good source of information about how to incorporate those photos into your day. And number 5, make it personal. Find ways to either bring in personal locations in the city, or elements from your culture, your country, your hometown, your own family traditions, wearing a locket, or a photo, little photo frame on the bouquet from a loved one, a special prayer cloth I had a couple have, just finding some, or an heirloom ring, or just some other traditions or something that you can bring in to your day. I love when my couples come from Scotland, the groom's usually wearing a kilt. And I just think that's really fun. It's very clear they're a Scottish couple, but they're in New York. So there are definitely ways to bring in some of your own heritage and culture into the day, and just make it even a little bit more unique. So yeah, so that's a lot. I know. Just to recap, the 5 things I think you should definitely consider when you're planning your intimate wedding or elopement in New York City is the day. Set the day. First, figure out the time of year, and then pick that day. Decide who and who is not coming, how big or how small this wedding is going to be, and maybe if it's a surprise or not. Something to consider. The third thing is definitely going to be, where will the ceremony and the celebration be held? So many choices in New York City. Where do you want to take photos? What iconic or not iconic elements of New York do you want to include? And then how can you make it personal? What are the ways you can bring your own heritage, culture, family traditions into your pictures? Even if it's just a 2-hour session at City Hall, there are definitely ways that we can do that. And I'd be happy to help you. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and please let me know if you have any questions, and good luck with your wedding planning. Thanks.